I grew up thinking that it was like genetics. That's how you are. You have to put up with it for the rest of your life. And I started to realize that wasn't true as I began to heal with food for the last 15 to 20 years. But once we did the GAPS diet and I saw the difference with really nutrient-dense healing foods and the difference it made for all of us, my food intolerances are gone. I can eat dairy as much as I like now. So my son, with his health changes, all of our family, and I realized, even more so, that it's definitely not a case of just genetics. As a friend of mine says, genetics load the gun, but lifestyle pulls the trigger.
From the Weston A. Price Foundation, welcome to the Wise Traditions podcast for wise traditions in food, farming, and the healing arts. We are your source for scientific knowledge and traditional wisdom to help you achieve optimal health.
Hey everybody, I'm your host, Hilda Labrada Gore. This is episode 201, and our guest today is Jo Whitton. Jo lives with her family in far north Queensland, Australia, where she runs her business, Quirky Cooking. She has a cookbook by the same name and a podcast entitled A Quirky Cooking Journey. She has led healing retreats in Australia and around the world. Jo is an expert on healing the gut. Today, she explains to us the relationship between our gut health and a variety of symptoms and health concerns, including allergies, arthritis, anxiety, and food sensitivities. Jo understands the problem firsthand. Growing up, she struggled with health issues such as frequent colds, histamine reactions, food intolerances, and more. As she got older, her health grew worse, and her children also began to have similar issues. As a matter of fact, her son, around age 11, began having strange phobias, severe anxiety, and other mental health concerns. So Jo shares today what she learned from the experience and her own intense research, including how the GAPS diet helped turn her son's health around and her own. She touches on the many symptoms of poor gut health and food sensitivities like constipation and diarrhea. She also talks about the initial strategy of most people with food intolerances, that is to simply avoid the ingredient in question. But there are ways to heal the gut for good, and today she offers hope on just that subject. Before we kick the show off, a quick nod to our sponsor, Ancestral Supplements. Grass-fed kidney by Ancestral Supplements, putting back in what the modern world has left out. New Zealand-sourced nose-to-tail organ meats and bone marrow in convenient gelatin capsules. Our family loves these supplements. We seriously cannot get enough. So order yours today at ancestralsupplements.com. Hey, and please support the Foundation's fundraising drive this month. If you enjoy this podcast, you just need to know that this is only one of the Foundation's many projects. They offer resources in Spanish, actually a whole Spanish podcast called Tradiciones Sabias. They support raw milk with a Real Milk campaign, and they have many other educational projects. So give a gift of any size through the Donate Now button on the website, westonaprice.org. And thank you in advance. This is Holistic Hilda, and you're listening to Wise Traditions. Welcome to Wise Traditions, Jo.
Thank you. Thanks so much for having me on the show.
I'm eager for people to hear the story of your son. Tell us what happened when he was about 11 years old.
He started to get really anxious and have strange phobias, and was always like, he couldn't manage his schoolwork very well. He would always be upset. And so I didn't know what it was, but I always think, well, let's think about food first. And so I became very careful with his diet, and he started to improve.
And you already were careful about your family's diet, right?
That's right. I became probably obsessively careful. But yeah, it was sort of up and down for a while, but slowly got worse. And then by the time he was 13, it seemed like an overnight change of really, really bad anxiety, terrible phobias. It was like he was seeing things. He was crying because the snakes were biting him and the rocks were falling on him and he couldn't get away, and, you know, all these things in his imagination, and very scared all the time, couldn't go out, couldn't dress himself, got to the stage where he couldn't feed himself. I was spoon feeding him at 13. We didn't know what in the world was going on. And of course, took him to the doctor, and she just kind of said anxiety and he'll have to see a psychologist. But I was thinking it's got to be more than this. And I researched, and as parents do, get online and try to look up all the symptoms, trying to figure out what it is. And I suddenly had a realization that it could be OCD, and I looked that up, and he had every single one of the symptoms. So I went back to the doctor and told her all the symptoms and said, do you think it could be this? And then she was like, oh yes. When they went through all the symptoms, she said, he's got a very severe case of OCD. And yeah, that was the start of a pretty big journey for us.
I guess so. You must have been so frightened and worried for him, right?
Yeah, it got to the stage by then that none of the family was coping. He was like, you'd finally get him to sleep at night, and then he'd just sit up in bed and start screaming at 11 p.m. And so no one was sleeping very well. I was always holding him and just trying to talk to him and pray with him and reason with him and calm him down. But you couldn't really reason with him, because when he was lucid, he would say, Mum, it feels like I'm in another world and nobody else understands. They can't come into my world. They don't know what's happening. And he said, I can't get out of it. I can sort of see that I'm in a unrealistic place, but I can't get out of it.
Oh, Jo. Well, this is heartbreaking, but I'm also wondering, besides the doctor saying, okay, he needs to see a therapist or a psychologist, was there any other advice they had for you?
Yeah. So when we went to see the doctor, both of us were sitting there crying because we didn't know what to do, and it was all so awful. And she said, I think he needs to go straight on to medication. So antidepressants, basically, that are used for OCD. And I said, well, because we're not coping, I'll say yes to that, because, you know, I'm not really a medication type. If at all possible, I would rather avoid it, especially antidepressants at 13. And I said, but we're not coping. So yes, put him on those, but I'm going to do everything I can to get him off as soon as possible by working on natural therapies to try and heal him. And the doctor was kind of like, yeah, well, you know, looking the other way, rolling her eyes a little. And she's like, well, you know, if you leave him on antidepressants, it's okay. She said to my son, you know, people stay on these all their life. It's completely fine. It's not an issue. Don't worry about it. And I'm just thinking, you don't tell a 13-year-old that he can be on antidepressants all his life. And I, you know, it was a very scary time for us. But, you know, I did what I think most parents would do, and just researched and found ways to work on his gut health, because I really knew that gut health had an effect on brain health. I knew that, but I'd never really realized how bad his gut health was. And so we had to go down that path of, really researching gut health and figuring out how to improve it. And then we did see differences very quickly.
That's amazing, and not surprising to me today, because now there's a lot of talk and research about the gut-brain connection. But maybe when you were researching this was kind of a new thing, huh?
Yeah, it was something that I'd heard little bits here and there, but you know, when you're not ready for it or it's not the right time, they sort of just go over your head. And then suddenly you remember all these things that you've sort of heard vaguely, and you go, wait a minute, I'm sure I heard something about the gut-brain connection. I'm sure I heard something about mental health being affected by gut health. And so then I started researching, and I started talking to I work with a lot of practitioners because I speak at health events. And so I rang them, talked to them, asked their opinion. And the overwhelming opinion was, yes, you have to work on healing his gut. And the best advice I got was to use the GAPS protocol to work on healing, like that really deep healing. And so that's what we did. Jumped in, and it was like pretty overwhelming at first.
I guess so. And for those who are listening who've never heard of it before, it is the gut and psychology syndrome and gut and physiology syndrome diet, an approach that Dr. Natasha Campbell-McBride kind of summarized in a book all about how to help heal the gut. And for people who are just starting on this kind of diet, it can be intimidating because it's very strict at first, right?
Yeah. When you look at it, you go, oh, I can't have this. And then you just change as you go along, it does really change your perspective, because you realize, wait a minute, all I'm doing is going back to really basic whole foods that are very easy to digest. It's very simple food. At first, it's pretty much meat, stocks, meat and veggies. That's it. And it's not starchy veggies, just the less starchy veggies. So it actually simplified my cooking. And I found that even though I was spending a lot of time chopping vegetables, because vegetables take the place of everything like bread, pasta, rice, all the fillers are filled with vegetables. So you end up, like, I think I was spending an hour longer each day in the kitchen chopping vegetables at least. But the actual cooking is very simple, and the food was delicious. And we saw results so quickly that it kept us going. I put the whole family on the diet. I just said, this is what we're doing. The kids were younger then, so this was about 5 years ago. And so I just put the whole family on the diet, and just at first there was a bit of sad teenagers because they couldn't have bread, but but they got over it. And when they started to see the change in their brother so quickly, then they were completely on board, and we stayed on strict GAPS for 2 years. But yeah, he improved so quickly. Within a few weeks, we saw him pull out of that really deep fog, and he started to be happy again and go out again. And he got a job at the local supermarket at the checkout, and he was like the happiest kid there. And within a few months, he was on stage speaking with me about youth mental health to like 200 people. Yeah, and within less than a year, he was on stage speaking in front of 1,000 people at 14 years old. Wow. And this is a kid who couldn't leave his room. And he was off all medication within less than a year. So the changes were amazing. He's nearly 18 now, and he's never been back on medication.
Now, some skeptics might say, well, it was the meds, not the diet. What would you say to that?
I asked the psychologist about that quite early on, because I saw the changes happening so quickly. And I said to her, I'm really afraid that it's the medication that's changing him and making him, like, he was doing the CBT training counselling through the psychologist, and he was skipping big sections of it because he was just skipping ahead so quickly. And I said to her, is he doing so well because of the medication? Because then I'm scared to take him off, because he might go straight back to what he was. She said, it's not the medication. She said, usually the doctors doubled the dose within a few months. And she said, he's still on a tiny dose, and he's going, leaps and bounds ahead of any other patients. And she ended up coming to the health seminar that we spoke at with Pete Evans, the chef here that really helps people to understand about healing with food. And she totally agreed with what was said. She said, it's so true. The food is making the difference. So it was really good to hear that from a health professional. And my doctor was convinced as well. She's absolutely lovely and very open to new ideas. But at first you could see that she was very like, this is a diet to help OCD. I don't know about this. But then within 6 months, she was saying to her student doctors, come in here and listen about this diet.
Amazing. Yeah. Now, in the U.S., we're struggling a lot with the younger generation with anxiety, OCD, depression, even kids on the autism spectrum. And some will say, well, these children are just wired differently. It's not that there's any kind of deficiency or issue. Did that ever cross your mind? Maybe my son is just wired this way.
Yeah, well, see, that's the kind of thing that I grew up with, because I always struggled with my health, with food intolerances. And he was pretty much told the same thing. I grew up thinking that it was like genetics. That's how you are. You have to put up with it for the rest of your life. And I started to realize that wasn't true as I began to heal with food for the last 15 to 20 years. But once we did the GAPS diet and I saw the difference with really nutrient-dense healing foods and the difference it made for all of us, my food intolerances are gone. I can eat dairy as much as I like now. So my son, with his health changes, all of our family, and I realized, even more so, that it's definitely not a case of just genetics. As a friend of mine says, genetics load the gun, but lifestyle pulls the trigger. So it's really a matter of, there's so many variables in there. Of course, you can have the genetics that mean that you don't detox well. or you don't produce some like glutathione or something very well. But once your lifestyle and your diet, if they sort of increase the toxic load and then your body's already having trouble getting rid of toxins, then you're going to struggle. And we also saw this with my other son because we have water damage in the house and there was hidden mold in the walls, and he's the one that really struggles with detoxing. And so then he started to have health issues from that and had to leave the house, live at my mum's, and do all the detox supplements to get rid of them. But then he got better within a few weeks. So you really see, people can struggle with their health and think, well, this is just the way it is forever and there's nothing I can do about it, and live a suboptimal life because of it on medications. But on the other hand, if they, began to work on a healthy lifestyle, getting the help that they need with diet and supplements and things like that, it's just amazing how much better you can feel. You just didn't realize that you could feel that good.
Coming up, Jo suggests that you don't need to consider a food sensitivity a life sentence where you need to avoid certain foods for the rest of your life. And she tells us whether or not supplements can be a part of the gut healing equation.
You're listening to the Wise Traditions podcast from the Weston A. Price Foundation. We pause now to recognize our sponsors.
There's no time like the present for giving a gift to the Weston Price Foundation, as we are currently conducting a fundraising drive. There are so many critical projects that need your support that the foundation undergirds, like debunking the soy heart health claim in court. We have the Real Milk Campaign project, and this podcast, of course. The drive ends on August 31st, so please give a gift of any size on the website westonaprice.org. Just click on the Donate Now button. And when we say donate now, we mean it. And thank you so much in advance. And Grass-Fed Kidney by Ancestral Supplements. Ancestral Supplements offers New Zealand-sourced nose-to-tail organ meats, bone marrow, and kidney in simple, convenient gelatin capsules. There's an old Comanche narrative that has been retold for generations about a young man who loved his wife so much that when she died, he fed her the fresh kidney of a buffalo, and then she came back to life. This tale has remained with the Comanche people to serve a greater purpose, to pass on the wisdom of feeding kidney to those who are ailing. There are many accounts of our ancestors taking an animal. The young and the warriors favored liver and heart, while the ailing, frail, and the old received kidney to build strength, immunity, and vitality. Kidney provided concentrated amounts of kidney-specific proteins, B12, selenium, and DAO that are now absent from the modern diet. This nourishment is known to support kidney, urinary, thyroid, and histamine health. So visit ancestralsupplements.com to see what they can do for you. Ancestral Supplements, putting back in what the modern world has left out. This is Holistic Hilda, and you're listening to Wise Traditions. Let's talk to the listener who isn't dealing with anything dramatic, but maybe a sense of something's off with my digestion or I'm getting brain fog. And let's talk a little bit about that because you've worked with folks on
for
that
a long time,
level.
Yeah, I first started my website 10 and a half years ago to help people with recipes for food intolerances and allergies, because that's where I was at and that's where my kids were at. And I had the idea that you just take out the foods that don't suit you and then you're fine, because those foods are kind of bad for you, like gluten, dairy, sugar, all the things, whatever people react to, eggs, nuts. You just take those foods out and then that's how you live your life. So I started my blog developing recipes for people with heaps of variations. Okay, if you need to swap out the nuts, this is what you do. If you need to swap out the dairy, this is what you do. But then when we went through this journey with Isaac, I realized, it really hit home to me that it's not a matter of pulling out foods. It's a matter of healing the gut so that you can handle a wide variety of whole foods. And like I said before, once we did that healing journey, I was able to handle so many more foods. So, it's amazing. And I do know people who've had children. My good friend has a child who had 44 allergies. Oh. 4 of them were anaphylactic. He was F-pies and all sorts of things when he was little. He was on 5 foods plus hypoallergenic formula at 5 years old.
Oh.
And she worked really, really carefully and very slowly bringing in the GAPS food. So like 1 drop of meat stock in his bottle each day and slowly building it up. And he is now, within a year actually, he had 1 allergy left, and that was nuts. And now she's so excited because he's coping with cashews and all sorts of things now. And he's the healthiest little boy you'd ever see. And, you know, they live on a farm and they've got their own cow, and he has the raw dairy, which he used to be anaphylactic to dairy. But as long as it's raw, he's good. And it's just amazing to see how food can really make a gigantic difference. So a healing diet, can make a gigantic difference even for people with allergies.
So, Jo, what is the drawback? Let's say I notice I'm sensitive to gluten, or I'm reacting somehow with acne or whatever it is, and I just avoid it. Why shouldn't I just avoid it the rest of my life?
Well, there's always minerals and vitamins and micronutrients in whole foods that we need. And I really think the best option is to have the widest variety of whole foods in your diet that you possibly can. And besides that, it gets boring if you constantly have to take foods out. I really missed butter. that was sad when I couldn't have butter. But yeah, I mean, who wants to live like that for the rest of their life? I have a lot of people ask me about the FODMAPs diet, for instance, and I say, yeah, but why do you want to go on a diet for the rest of your life that's going to really restrict your food, when instead you can work on healing the gut and bring those foods back in? You know, and I guess people don't really, they're not often told that that's a possibility, and they think that they have to take the foods out forever.
Yes.
That's a bit sad.
It is sad. It is sad. And so let's say that same person is like, okay, I'm tired of avoiding gluten. I want to begin this healing journey. Would you recommend the GAPS diet, or do you have other protocol that you recommend?
I highly recommend the GAPS diet. And most people don't have like anaphylactic allergies or whatever, and they can handle they will find they get enough healing just from the full GAPS diet. And that's a really wide variety of foods. So most people will heal on that. But if you need to take it deeper, or if you've got a lot of foods that you react to, then it's good to go back to the intro diet and start there with just minimal ingredients and slowly build it up. It's like a elimination diet where you just bring things in little by little. So as you add a food in, you wait a few days, and then you see if you react. And then if you're ready for it, you keep going, keep it in your diet. Just little by little, you're adding things in. And it's a bit of a dance, you know, a back and forth dance. It's not straightforward, and it's different for everyone. And you will find that there's the ups and downs as you go along, but definitely worth doing. I've just seen so many people heal through this diet. And one lady, for instance, who is in my gut health program, she had the autoimmune arthritis. And she's young, like she was in her late 30s maybe, and she wasn't able to walk her kids to school because her arthritis was so bad. And within a year of doing deep healing with GAPS, she was able to walk her kids to school, and she was off medications, and she was just so happy. And she cried when she told me, she's like, it's like I've got my life back. You know, that arthritic pain is mostly gone. And that's when it's something like that, she may have to stay quite strict with her diet for the rest of her life, but that's worth it. You know, you've got to be careful if you're really prone to inflammation. You've got to be really careful with your diet, but it's just amazing the changes that it can make.
It is amazing, and it's more than just dealing with digestive things. In other words, our gut issues can be linked to all sorts of symptoms and conditions all over our body, right? Yes,
definitely. Pretty much all disease is based on inflammation. So if the foods that you're eating if your gut's not coping with them and your body's sort of reacting with inflammation, it can come out in all different ways. It can be anxiety, it can be OCD, it can be eczema, it can be headaches, it can be diarrhea, it can be constipation, it can be, you know, all sorts of things. So arthritis. So we have just seen a wide variety of people helped by working on their gut health. And I guess, you know, 100 years ago or more, when people were eating a much more natural diet and not surrounded by so many chemicals, and toxins in their environment, it was less common to have all these chronic illnesses. But sadly, we're in a world that is really difficult to stay clean, if you know what I mean. It's that we're surrounded by all this stuff constantly, and there's not a lot we can do about it, but there is some things we can control, and diet is one of them to a great extent.
Absolutely. The other thing that crosses my mind, the reason it's hard to heal in our environment is because we're quickly looking for the easy route out.
Oh, definitely.
When you said it took 2 years on the GAPS diet to bring some healing to your family, I'm sure some people are like, okay, no, just give me a pill, right?
I know. And that's what I often say to people. You've got to be patient with yourself when you're healing, because, you'll get through a couple of months and you'll think, well, why aren't I better? And wait a minute, now I've gained weight and now I'm not getting anywhere. But then you realize after another year, I was getting better, but it was taking time. It was things going on in the background that my body was working on, but it just takes time to come out. And when I was 1 year into GAPS, it was really fascinating. A photo came up on my Facebook memories of me a year ago, and my face was so skinny and my eyes had these big dark shadows under. And I was so amazed. I hadn't realized how much I'd healed because it had happened so slowly. And I looked at photos of me, a year apart and just went, whoa. And I put that on Facebook and everyone just went, no way. Because I think it's really good to keep a journal and take photos when you start working on your health. And then it's encouraging to go back and go, oh, okay, it doesn't feel like much is happening. But when I look at the photos, when I read my journal and look at the symptoms that I had a few months ago, a year ago, 2 years ago, I've come a long way. And it's important to do that.
Documented, journal, even whatever it takes so that you can go back and kind of rejoice at the successes. Exactly.
Yeah.
Now, what would you say, again, I was talking about the easy route out. I've heard of some products on the market that promise kind of a quicker healing for the gut, whether it's something you drink or some probiotics you pop. What's your opinion on those, Jo?
I think that there can be good supplements that help with making it faster to heal the gut. You would need to get a really good practitioner who's not just trying to take your money. I always recommend people to get a GAPS practitioner who is trained in medicine or nutrition, has studied GAPS, but has also been through the journey themselves, not just someone who's gone and done a course and never actually gone through it, with their own family. My GAPS practitioner had major health issues and adrenal fatigue and all sorts of chronic fatigue. She was like so sick, and she worked through GAPS, healed, and then started helping other people. And that's definitely what I would recommend. I know that sometimes I've been to naturopaths and talked to them about gut health, and all they've really offered me is go off gluten and dairy and take these pills. And I did that for 15 years and I did not heal. I did what they told me to. I took the herbal tinctures, I took the medicines and the supplements, and I healed minimally. But it was that 2 years of intensive food healing. I didn't take any supplements in that time, and that's when I healed. So that's really interesting to me. I just think we try to take shortcuts as humans and try and do things the easy way when sometimes it's just going to have to be the hard way. I mean, if you can find, I don't really know about any amazing probiotics and supplements that help. I really think the best probiotics are the natural ones when you make your own sauerkraut and sauerkraut juice and kefir and kombucha and all these things. That's where you're going to get the best probiotics from, in my opinion.
I agree 100%. Like there's nothing that beats what you make in your own home with the bacteria from the air, as opposed to, popping some pills and hoping that the bacteria are still live and able to help heal the gut.
I know my practitioner does say that after a certain period of time, some people do need a little cherry on top with some intensive supplementation, but yeah, definitely don't rely on just that. I tried that and it didn't work years ago. I think we get we also get a bit lazy when we have a pill to take and we go, oh, well, my diet's not as important because I'm taking this, so it'll be fine.
Exactly.
And so then we just undermine what we're doing anyway.
No, you're so right. We need to really look to real food for healing. And I appreciate your emphasis on the GAPS diet. And now I want to ask you, because we're coming near the end of our time, Jo, if the listener could do one thing to take a step in this direction of real food healing, where should they begin? What would you recommend?
I always tell people start with whole foods. And I know most of us probably listening to this podcast would say, oh, I already do that. But for 20 years, I thought I was eating whole foods. You know, you hear this whole, oh, it's 80-20. You know, you can have all things in moderation, but my all things in moderation was really a bit out of hand. And I didn't realize that until I started really working on food for healing. I didn't realize how often I was having breads and sweet things and bought treats and maybe some hot chips while I was out, and you know, and that kind of stuff crept in without me realizing it until I was having more and more inflammatory foods and foods that weren't whole foods really at all, but really focus on pulling it back to foods from nature, foods with a cellular structure, foods that will actually give you nutrients, and just sort of get rid of those filler foods that do nothing for you and focus on the nutrient-dense whole foods.
And then you'll definitely be heading in the right direction.
Even if you never do a diet as such, that alone will make a gigantic difference.
Well, Jo, thank you so much for talking with us today. It has been a great pleasure.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Our guest today was Jo Whitton. Learn more about her work on her website, quirkycooking.com.au. And me, you can find me on Instagram at Holistic Hilda. For the show notes for this and every episode of the Wise Traditions podcast, go to our website, westinaprice.org. And that's it. Thanks for listening, everybody, and see you soon.
Wise Traditions is a project of the Weston A. Price Foundation for wise traditions in food, farming, and the healing arts. The content on this podcast is provided for informational purposes only and is not intended to substitute for the advice provided by your doctor or other healthcare professional. It is not intended to be, nor does it constitute healthcare or medical advice. On behalf of the Weston A. Price Foundation, thanks for listening. We have many free resources to support you on your health journey. Visit westonaprice.org to find podcasts, articles, videos, and more. You can also find a local chapter near you for help in finding sources of great food. We invite you to support the Foundation's mission of education, research, and activism by becoming a member. Thanks again, and take care.